The Great Chicago Fire started the evening of Sunday, October 8, 1871, and burned until the morning of Tuesday, October 10th. It spread quickly to the north and east, crossing the river, and finally destroying an area of the city 4 miles long and 1 mile wide. The fire killed an estimated 300 people and left 100,000 people homeless. Roughly 1/3 of the city lay in ruins. Those who survived the Great Chicago Fire never forgot what they'd been through. The blaze produced countless tales of bravery and heroism, but the fire also changed the way that firefighters and public officials thought about fire safety. Lauren Tarshis is the author of the I Survived series. One of her recent books is I Survived the Great Chicago Fire. She sat down with Casey Grant from the National Fire Protection Association to discuss one of the most famous fires in American history.
One of the things I love most about writing the I Survived series is that I get to do research and I often meet amazing experts who take me back into history, share their knowledge. And today I am so excited to be here with Casey Grant from the National Fire Protection Association. So how did the fire really start, Casey?
In the case of the Great Chicago Fire, there was a lot of fanfare over Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over the lantern.
The legend is that Mrs. O'Leary's cow in a barn kicked over a lantern and that caused the entire fire. And poor Mrs. O'Leary and her family had their lives ruined because of this.
We do know that the fire started at that location, but how it started, the official cause of that fire is unknown.
We do know there was a terrible drought. The entire city was made of wood.
Not just the buildings, but sidewalks.
Right.
Sawdust was even used to try to help control the dust in the roads. It really created a very flammable situation.
It was really a disaster waiting to happen.
So the fire started on that Sunday evening. The conditions, weather-wise, were not good.
Right, hot and windy, right?
That's right. They actually had several fires in the days and weeks preceding, including a very major fire. I believe it was the day before.
The day before, and it exhausted all of the firefighters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
By the time they were set up and really began to fight this fire, it had already gotten tremendous headway and was sweeping through the neighborhoods, and they were really outgunned from the very beginning.
Right, because the firefighters at the time, of course, didn't have fancy fire engines and...
Well, they had horse-drawn steamers using coal to run the pumps. It was a much different technology than what we have today.
There are many diary entries and letters written by people who survived that fire that day. People described looking up and it was almost beautiful in a horrifying way, that they would look up at the sky and it almost looked like it was filled with fireflies or fireworks. And those were these embers that were being driven by the wind and setting fires all over the city.
Right, and from the standpoint of the firefighters, they can make a stand and try to have a line of defense at the river or wherever, but the embers are just blowing right over them and they can't keep up with it.
So Casey, how did people survive this terrible fire?
In any disaster like this, people survive any way they can. Situations like a great fire that's moving along, chasing them. Refuge, in some cases, would be in the river or Lake Michigan. Really, anywhere you could go to get beyond it or get to the outskirts of town. Most people were able to get out of the way and survive,
right. So
except for those few unfortunate people.
One of the reasons why we remember the Great Chicago Fire, why it is really the most famous fire in American history, is because of how it has changed the way we build cities.
We build our cities today with fire protection in mind, and people don't even realize it. The width of streets are put in not only for convenience of vehicles and so forth, but as fire breaks.
Right.
They're natural fire breaks. The exterior of the buildings are much more fire resistant in terms of design. We want to keep fires confined to the building of origin if it does occur, and not spread from building to building to building like we've seen in some of these great fires.
So tell me about Fire Prevention Week.
Fire Prevention Week is celebrated every year in the beginning of October in recognition of the noteworthy disaster that happened in Chicago. And we look at Fire Prevention Week as an important chance to remind ourselves of the importance of fire safety for everybody. Fire safety is everyone's business.
Casey, I'm not the only one who gets to ask you questions. We have some great questions from 5th graders from Myron J. Francis Elementary School in East Providence, Rhode Island. And their first question is, how come the 185 firefighters in Chicago didn't try harder to put the fire out?
Well, I think those firefighters tried as hard as was humanly possible to put that fire out, just like they do today. Firefighters today, they're our heroes. They work so hard doing what they do, but sometimes the odds are stacked against you, and that clearly was the case here. They were outgunned from the very beginning, arriving to this massive fire that was already well beyond their control, already exhausted from the previous fires they were fighting. There was nothing for them to do other than just do their very best, which they did.
And here's a question for me. How did you feel writing about this life-turning event? Like all of the I Survived topics, it's a harrowing experience in many ways, reliving these events. What was really interesting about the Chicago fire research was that there was so much to read that what was actually written by people who were there. So reading letters and diaries and essays and articles written at the time, I actually had the feeling that I was being pulled back in time to the night of that fire. So it was a very powerful experience, and I felt a great connection to the people of Chicago after finishing this book.